Okay, friends, colleagues, we'll start with our third discussion of today's conference. And it is an honor for me to be helping to moderate a podium, take the podium one of these discussions as well, so at that point I will step down. Anyway, I'm very happy to be able to welcome you back to this round of discussion and to give the floor to left and green political forces on the question at hand today. Claude Thom's not here, but his assistant is here. So I think we can get down to work straight away. Thomas Domares is going to be our first speaker this afternoon. Thomas, would you like to begin? You come from Brandenburg, where left parties are in government. Yes, thanks very much. And perhaps I could just start by making one comment. We have been involved in the local government since for a couple of years right now, together with other left-wing social forces. We've campaigned to have no more open minds. Then since 2009, that's a claim that we have put forward in Parliament as well, and 23 of the 80-some members of local parliament are in favor of stopping the use of coal. Starting in 2009, we entered a coalition government in Brandenburg with the SPD, an area where lots of lignite has been used, very strong industry there as well, but they are very hesitant, very reticent to move away from coal. Since we entered the government in 2009, we've had the fortune to have put forward the Ministry for Finance, and our main question was as follows. The parties decided with their victory in 2009 that they wanted a complete independence from coal by 2015. So the question is how we could achieve that, and our main and what the main challenges would be in bringing that about. So we wanted to know how we can change over to renewable energy, and one huge problem, which it has to do with lignite, is the fact that there are a number of different industries involved. There's mining, there's the storage industry, and we had to make sure that we didn't have conflicts of interest there. This year we had two demonstrations going on. One group of people against wind energy and another crowd of people in favor of wind energy. So there's been a lot of conflict about this, particularly in the Brandenburg region of Germany. We managed to get signatures, many signatures, thousands of signatures for a petition to get rid of coal, but then we didn't have enough signatures in the second round, and it didn't make it through. So it's something that we've seen going back and forth. The same with solar energy, wind energy, other sources of renewable energy. We've said that we need to further develop storage technologies. That's one of the main sources of objects of funding in the present financial period, so that we can increase energy efficiency. And here perhaps we can also mention a particular project where we've tried to use wind energy and water energy to replace a lot of the energy that we used to come from coal, to see how that renewable energy could be stored. We also wanted to see how we could come out with a reliable set of German and European conditions, which would allow us to guarantee security of supply, but would also respect the needs of the environment and of society, and which would be socially acceptable to the people affected. We've got an energy strategy which we produced for 2030, where the energy minister has worked with us on the goal of eliminating lignite use by then. Some measures have been taken in that direction. There's a particular program which under the present financing period has provided funding to conservation organizations in order to help make this a reality. We've also worked with planning departments in local government in the Berlin region, trying to make sure that no new open mines are created. I think that it's something which people in Berlin are very sensitive to because of the problems with water supply. Fortunately, we've got an administrative agreement between the national government and the local governments in Brandenburg and Saxony on how we can manage the contaminated water. Now, as left-wing forces, we were against selling off energy plants. We've contacted left-wing forces in Sweden as well. They gave us some of their advice. And now in January, we've met together with the regional evangelical church, which has been playing a very active role in the entire discussion on a structural move away from lignite. We've been trying to develop into a model region, and that's something which we've extended since 2015. If we can manage to move away from lignite, that's something which we have to achieve at regional, national, and European level, so that necessary support is provided at all of these levels. Finally, it's something that we really have to think of in a holistic way. We have to think outside the box. And we've now come out with a proposal which we put on the table with our Polish neighbors, as well as other local authorities in the Lausitz region. So we've tried to see how local governments in all of this area can be involved, how we can make sure that the investment bank in Brandenburg is involved in this effort as well. The finance minister has made it clear that it's not a question of finances, it's a question of the existence of plans, and the plans have to be developed from the very beginning with the involvement of civil society. So it's very important for us, for all of the administrative authorities affected, to be actively involved in the attempt to bring about a structural change as well. So it's something which we really are trying to promote together with all of the stakeholders. In the Brandenburg region, we've been working together with representatives of the metal industry and the mining industry as well. Thank you. Thanks very much. Well, it was very quick. I hope we have a copy of that contribution as well, which we can include in our documents and then send it to people who weren't here today. Okay, Jana Pinker is next. She comes from my area, from Saxony. She's a member of the local parliament.
Colleagues, yes, we will have to speak quite quickly. I've brought something with me. It's a speech about recent years' activities on draft legislation, different approaches. I've got it as a PDF file which I can put on the website. I'm happy to do that. We've just heard from Brandenburg Parliament, and I would just say something about cooperation in the left. We just heard that there was a problem in the coalition with the SPD and there were adaptation difficulties. Well, until then, it was quite a good. There was quite a good forum, the Lausitzer Forum, with cooperation with different politicians from that region. But it collapsed because there were different approaches in Brandenburg and Saxony, and so far at political level, we can't say that there is any political cooperation for the structural changes in Alsatia. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to get together with Saxony and move forward together. I think that would be very valuable. I'd like to tell you about recent political activities that we've discussed in the regional parliament. We had draft legislation submitted on structural change. Our group presented that. We're saying structural change should be backed up by money each year because we had difficulties, disputes in Alsatia, but also in Freiburg, where I'm from. There were the mining students and the ecologists. There was quite a hefty disagreement, very much criticism. So it was not just in Alsatia itself, but it's also affecting young people throughout Saxony, and discussions can get quite hot. So I think if we leave people with uncertainty and we don't show any prospects, then we're going to see that kind of dispute more and more often. And I don't think at European level, national level or regional level that I can detect any concepts for structural change. I think the political pressure needs to be stronger, and it needs to come from the parliaments, because in Saxony, to be honest, the government coalition is always talking about there being no phase-out scenario, although you hear a different story from the federal government. So we still hear the same story being put forward about lignite. We talk about expanding mining, and there's HPA that came in after Vattenfall. They've got a good company conditions. They can accelerate the authorization process. So that doesn't really fit in with the phase-out for lignite, the phase-out program. But I wanted to say something about structural change and what is linked to it. If I'd been mining minister in Saxony, of course I would have bought Vattenfall, because we need to ask these questions about ownership of raw materials. I'm not in favour of raw materials not being seen as part of the whole service complex. And that would have given us a way out of lignite, because as a state company, as participant in a strategy, you can say, okay, we, the left, want to phase out lignite by 2040, profits will be set aside, safety and security will be promoted, the jobs will be secured, and we didn't see that. And now a Czech company has arisen in the place of the Swedish one, and we don't know what's going to happen. There's a job guarantee until 2020, but nobody knows what's going to happen after that. There's no security or there's no security deposit being put aside. I mean, you never know what's going to happen. Recovery and renaturalization of that region has not been promoted either. Thomas has just said that we have a company called LMBV, a regional company, and every 2 years we have to negotiate a contract on how to clean up that old lignite landscape. He has a positive view. I don't have such a positive view because some of the funds that have fallen by the wayside, how we're going to compensate for that, I don't know. And finally, we're talking about the budget negotiations in Saxony once again. We, the left, are asking for 5 million euros per year to be set aside for that research approach at European level. We can accompany that at Saxony level. We need research funds. I've just heard from Brandenburg whether there's any money for structural change there, and I hear that that's not the case.
Vielleicht noch als Ergänzung, also Sachsen wird...
Thanks very much. Okay, so Saxony is governed by a left-right coalition that's had certain results in terms of a political impasse for many, many years, for decades now. It's something that I've suffered from as a local politician as well. Thank you, Jana. Claudia Demisch is next. I'm very happy that we have someone here from the Scottish Parliament, from the Scottish Labour Party. You're very welcome here, and I'm very happy to give you the floor. Go ahead, please.
Thank you for the kind welcome, and I'm very pleased to be here and to share ideas and to be made to think more structurally, which I don't always have time to do. So I'll take back much of the vision and the views, and especially in the situation we are in Scotland and the United Kingdom with the disaster of Brexit. We try to make the best of it, and events like this will enable those of us who are here to share ideas and to build and forge even stronger links. So thank you again. Many of us have heard, and some have experienced, the ruthless shift from the closure of the deep mines to the poorly regulated spread of open cast mining, with heavy transport on rural roads, exposure to dust and noise, poor working conditions, infrequently ununionized work, the stalling of green futures for our communities, and unrestored sites where companies have gone bust. Then, with wind farms in Scotland, there have been many missed opportunities in relation to ownership and financial benefits to communities. And now, as part of the Just Transition, I am bringing an onshore fracking ban bill to the Scottish Parliament, which I hope, of course, will be successful. We must oppose yet another exploitation of our communities with further risks to workers' health and transport issues for communities and to water and biodiversity. I am clear that we do not need onshore fracking as a transition fuel in the fight against climate change, and we must move to new jobs in sustainable energy systems. To focus on Scotland and the UK more widely, Mark Carney, Governor of the Bank of England, has said, "It is a historic chance to mainstream climate finance and turn risk into opportunity." And Michael Bloomberg has, he is chairing a G20 industry task force, as many of you will know, due to deliver a set of recommendations on how companies should voluntarily disclose climate-related financial risks, and this will report early next year. And I'm very clear, and I hope you will agree, that we must demand that companies contribute to the just transition process, financially and in every way. There's also the issue of divestment, which there's a lot of work going on in the UK on, and I'm sure across Europe, and not least because of a sit-in by students who bravely took this on at Edinburgh University. Even an institution as august and traditional and rather old-fashioned as the University of Edinburgh Court has divested from some of the heaviest fossil fuel emitters. And I think it's very important that we remember that we have a right as pension holders in public utilities and across Europe and in the public sector to demand that we know where our money is going. In the Scottish Parliament, I'm proud that we passed our Climate Change Act in 2009, which was forged on a cross-party basis. And this has set clear targets to lower emissions and also set demanding annual targets, which we haven't always met, but we have worked hard to do so. Tied to the Act, we have I think this might be of interest to people across Europe, and maybe there are other places where this happens. Climate action plans, or as we call them, reports on policies and proposals. And these come before the Parliament for scrutiny, and there are alternatives can be suggested by committees before they're ratified for the heaviest emitters, which are, of course, energy and transport and agriculture. And the third one will come before my committee in the new year. And there will also be a draft energy strategy, and the Scottish Government, which is SNP, which is not my party, but we have many synergies, not independents, but there we go, that's another story. We are working very, very hard together to make sure that those strategies are right. So there will be key opportunities for Scottish Labour in terms of all the bills that are coming forward, including also a Warm Homes Act and a Circular Economy Act, to ensure that just transition amendments are at the heart of these bills, to make sure that skills, both initial and transferable, research and innovation, sustainable energy innovation centre synergies between heat, transport, storage and more, and the manufacture of kit and cooperative and community obligations, and that rural issues are all taken into account. So we will have a busy few years in this session. Today, I believe, will help to combat the fear of change by businesses, by parliamentarians and local representatives, by unions and by communities. And it is challenging for the Scottish Labour Party to move forward with concerns of the unions for current pay and conditions, for instance, in the North Sea for oil workers, and also because of past traditions. And as Shadow Cabinet Secretary for Environment and Climate Change, I've developed a discussion paper across the portfolios, which we've been engaging on throughout the summer and into what is now winter, with roundtables with NGOs, unions and others, to look at the way forward. In local government, we have elections next year, and Edinburgh also has a cooperative council, and I'm a member of the Cooperative Party as well. I believe there are strong cooperative models that can be used in Scotland and I know in Europe as well. And more municipal structures must be set up for a range of issues such as district heating. Next week, Friends of the Earth Scotland, Unison and Unite Unions are holding an alliance conference to further develop just transition processes and structures, and this is supported by the Scottish Trade Union Congress. And in the Scottish Parliament, we have a renewables debate tomorrow, so we'll be able to take back the views from today and highlight those in our Parliament. Devolution has enabled Scotland to function effectively and imaginatively for our transition and for our geographical needs. But events like today will enable us all to push further structurally in so many ways. So thank you for listening.
Thanks very much indeed. Thanks very much for that contribution. Our next speaker is our colleague from Luxembourg, from the Green group there. Claude was supposed to come, can't be here, but his assistant and right hand, Jeremy, is here. Go ahead, please, Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you very much. Please accept the apology of Claude Thomas, MEP for the Greens, FA in the European Parliament. He couldn't make it, but you know how closely the Green group and the GUE groups are working together. So he asked me to come here to replace him and to say a few words on his behalf. So firstly, I'd like to share with you the message that green is social, that at the heart of the green project of moving towards a 100% renewables, high energy efficiency energy system in Europe, citizens, workers should take all the part of the system change. There is already in Europe at this stage 1 million jobs related to energy efficiency and energy services, another 1 million jobs related to renewable energy sources, and many more to come if we manage to shift from fossil fuel and nuclear system towards a renewable energy system. When we talk about moving away from coal, we mean two things. First thing is related to the coal mining, and second thing is the usage of coal and lignite in the power sector. So the subject of mines was covered already by the previous speakers. I'd like to focus on the power sector. You have today in Europe a situation where coal and lignite power plants are highly profitable. And this is the reason why they are still operating, why they are still connected on the grid. Why are they still profitable today in the EU? Because of the failure of the market. And more precisely, because of the failure of the EU carbon market. We've been in a situation for quite some years where the carbon market is actually reaching historically low levels. It's today like between 4 and 5 euro per ton of CO2. And with such conditions, it's obvious that the market alone cannot deliver the clear messages to phase out coal. And that's why we're also extremely disappointed by the proposals from the European Commission, which were published last week, the so-called winter package under the Energy Union. Because basically, the message of the European Commission is the following. Okay, the market has failed for 10 years to deliver a single reduction of CO2 emissions because of many flaws. Let's continue with the market. So we believe it's highly inconsistent. It's not taking stock of the failure of the ETS, and it's not going as far as we would like in terms of ambition for renewable energy sources and for energy efficiency. So one simple figure. The Commission is proposing a 27% target of energy efficiency for 2030, while the European Parliament, many political forces were calling for at least 40%, which we believe is the right figure for 2030. And it's understood by various impact assessments that 1% addition in energy efficiency allows 3 million houses to be refurbished in Europe, meaning 7 million people lifted out of energy poverty. So energy efficiency is a social policy. It needs to be acknowledged as such, and it's highly disappointing that the Commission wouldn't propose something more ambitious for 2030. Coming to renewables, here again we strongly believe that citizens and energy citizens should be at the heart of the shift towards more renewables in the system. And here again we are highly disappointed by the fact that the Commission seems to be acknowledging this fact only with words, but not really with concrete provisions. So last week during the presentation of this big new so-called ambitious legislative package, 2 commissioners came to the press and presented their new set of initiatives saying, well, we are now delivering on the promise we made 2 years ago when we came into office to make the EU world #1 in renewables and to place citizens at the center of the energy transition. But at the same time, what's happening for renewables? Firstly, removal of priority dispatch of the renewable generated electricity in the system. Secondly, moving from a system where each and every citizen, each and every cooperative can enter into self-consumption via benefiting from feed-in tariffs or this type of support schemes, towards a system based on auctions. Here again, this is a rhetoric of the market that only auctions can deliver support to renewables, and we Greens are quite critical to this. Why? Because can you imagine a small local cooperative competing with large-scale utilities to win a tender issued by a central government? It just doesn't work. And for this reason, we are extremely disappointed by the fact that the Commission keeps having this rhetoric of the market, auctions for everybody, carbon market, why it didn't deliver, and extremely conservative provisions related to the priority access and priority dispatch of the electricity generated by renewables. So I will leave it here with maybe just like one last word. Also, second issue of big disappointment from the proposals of the Commission is we are not phasing out coal subsidies. On the contrary, the new proposals are reinforcing so-called capacity mechanisms. And what is behind capacity mechanisms? It means public money going to fossil fuels. And we expected this time to be over, but unfortunately we are extremely skeptical, and we are afraid that the Commission is organizing another so-called lost decade for renewables and for the energy transition over the next 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
No. Ah ja, das geht aber. Wunderbar.
Okay, things seem to be working. Thanks very much. I think that as a party group, we should also be actively involved in this matter in the Parliament as well. We've fought a lot with lots of success so far, but I think there's a lot more that we can and should continue to do together. Right. Our next speaker from the Red-Green Alliance from Denmark, Emma Johansen. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The Red-Green Alliance is, for those of you who don't know, the most left-wing political party in the Danish Parliament with 14 seats out of 179. The situation in Denmark, Denmark always looks as if we are so progressive with regard to green policies. And I wish to disillusion you a little, because the big issue being discussed at the moment is fracking. Total has pulled out of Denmark and it's still being discussed. The Home Rule Greenland Parliament has adopted extraction of uranium, and the Danish Parliament has adopted also that it's going to trade with it. So our experience is that during the time of neoliberalism, more or less, it has been a setback. But the previous years were so fruitful that we can still build on all the windmills, all the wind turbines and so on, everything that we did before. So we have been able to promote it, but we do not at this time have a green majority in the Danish Parliament. That is a fact, and that is, of course, we regret that. We are still, as a party, working within an agreement we made in 2012 with the central-left government. But it is difficult because it's being continually weakened. But we think it's important to have these deals and these agreements because we can keep the government and the working of the deals. We can sort of keep them to the point. But it is difficult. It's extremely difficult, and we are considering whether we should keep in it or not. Anyway, at this point in time, we are writing a new and updated energy and climate and energy plan. This is an update that has been going on for years, as we had the first one in '95, and the new one has a goal of 2040 or 50. It says 50 because that is the goal of the Paris Agreement. So it has put in this goal, but we think that we can do it by 2040. And we think it's necessary to do it by 2040. It is a total transition to clean energy, by electricity. And we think we can do it by 2040. We think we should do it because it's the only way to keep within a limit of 2 degrees rising of the temperatures within the century. This is the only way. We have to recognize that 2050 is not a very good measure. It should be a lot firmer. And if we look at the figures put by the EU and by our own government, they are totally insufficient. I think it's around 30%. In 2020, a cut of 30%. the EU and 40% in 2020 and 30% in 2030, but actually you need a 50% cut by the EU in 2020 and 75% in 2030. So it's actually far too low, and we have to take that into account. And this is why also we have made a very ambitious plan. This plan focuses on reduction of energy consumption, and these are in the vital areas such as transportation, industry, and to some extent heating. But heating we have already advanced to some degree, and we also plan phasing out of fossil fuels, and that of course because we wish to have a total transition to electricity-driven energy production, and then also 100% organic farming. And it's the cut in energy consumption is nearly half of what we have today, nearly half according to our plan. The main pillars of this plan is, on one hand, technological transition. This is not difficult at all. The difficulty is the transition to democratic control of the transition. This is extremely difficult because it means to be more in control of the market and of economy. And we all know that this is where we are. This is really the real difficult point that we have to discuss, because this also depends on our forces and on the balance of power, and therefore it's very, very difficult. And then it's also, of course, international climate agreements, and it's also assisting the developing countries in their transition. Because when we say electricity-driven, transition, of course we know that in huge parts of the developing countries they have no electricity. So they are much further behind than we are. So I'm going to think about finishing. Is that what you mean? Yeah. Well, I would say that as I said, the main difficulty is the fight fighting for social change. The transition to fight climate change, you have to fight for social change, and this depends a lot on the balance of power. We work in our political perspective to demonstrate that it is possible to develop a welfare society without having fossil fuels, with eliminating the fossil fuels. And we also work to promote a closer cooperation with trade unions, because that's important in order to fight for social justice. And the trade unions, it is of course difficult because of the anxiety about job security. We think that we can already show that in some green areas where we have had green transition, we can show that it's possible to have green jobs. That it is possible with education of workers, and it doesn't have to happen overnight, that we can transform the workforce to be able to work in green areas. And then we have legislation and taxes and so on that can help. And of course it can help best in the areas that are public property, that is in energy, that is in transportation, and in farming. We can also, these are areas where we can influence. In all those areas that are in private hands, we cannot influence the same. So, finished.
Als nächstes spricht
Our next speaker is Kate Hudson, National Secretary Left Unity from the UK. Go ahead, please.
Thanks very much indeed. I'm sure we all agree on the urgency of the task that we're facing, and climate change is accelerating far faster than has been anticipated over the last couple of decades. And of course, with a climate change denier in the White House, this can only get worse. The only viable solution from our point of view is a green-red economy, green in the sense of rapid progress towards emissions targets and sustainable energy derived from renewables, red in the sense of a planned process backed by legislation and state investment. And of course, that's not just an ideological position, of course, it's a survival position too. In the United Kingdom, we've had the worst of both worlds, especially from the point of view of the workforce. As Matthew said this morning in his contribution, the coal industry was destroyed by Margaret Thatcher for political reasons, and subsequently the mining communities have become an employment wasteland. The failure to reinvest in deindustrialized areas, the failure to adequately support renewable energy development, all these things have prevailed in Britain. And of course that is through the dominance of the free market rather than having a sustainable industrial development strategy. And of course that's essential, as was outlined by speakers this morning. We very strongly believe that a crucial factor is to engage the workforce. There is substantial evidence to show that transition happens best when the workers are involved. They have to be involved in the planning process. And from our point of view, it has to be a tripartite process with government, workers and industry. And in Britain we have a very strong history of workforces working very developed plans. People may have heard of the Lucas Aerospace Plan from the 1970s, but there have been other subsequent initiatives that have been very strong. In terms of process, I'd like to draw some parallels because I think there are interesting lessons to be learned from what we call defence diversification, which is actually a kind of transitioning process from military industrial jobs, a kind of just transition from military industrial jobs. And this is a very big debate in the United Kingdom, currently around the question of jobs and the nuclear weapons sector. And in fact, it was one of the first policies that Jeremy Corbyn adopted when he was first campaigning to be leader of the Labour Party. A defence diversification policy, enshrining a defence diversification agency into law once he becomes Prime Minister, which would include again these three forces of government, industry and the workforce. And that will be absolutely crucial to get the trade unions on side with his nuclear weapons policy, because currently we have two big trade unions who recruit in the sector, obstructing the change of Labour Party policy on nuclear weapons. So he well understands the essential factor of getting the workforce on side. So in looking at this sector transition in this sector, it's clear that key factors are advanced planning, sufficient resources and political direction at national and local level. And where it's been applied, it's shown to bring long-term net benefits to local economies with minimal transitional unemployment. I'm going to give the example of the United States, in fact, where this process is actually enshrined in law. It was legislated on in 1988 with the Base Realignment and Closure Act, which is a 5-year process with federal government ensuring the maintenance of local employment at least at previous levels. It includes an Office of Economic Adjustment to redress negative effects the change on manufacturing communities, and also the creation of alternative local employment. And just to show the impact of such a process, over the period 1991 to 2000, 13 bases were closed, and in all cases more new civilian jobs were created following closure, sometimes up to 1,000% increase on civilian employment. It's interesting to compare that to Europe, where there is no mandatory political process. Some of you will be familiar with the EU converse programs in the 1990s that were not always effective because it depended on levels of cooperation between local, city and national governments and the willingness of private enterprise to make investment. There have been some positive cases in Europe. I won't go into I don't have time to go into them, but some of you will know about the Bad Aibling site in Bavaria. This was redeveloped as part of a national program of zero energy city, in which brownfield sites were redeveloped to utilize a broad range of renewable energy and energy efficiency systems. There was another example, similar though less ambitious, which I'm sure Claudia is familiar with in Scotland at the RAF base Edsel. So all these examples show the necessity of central and local government funding for transition, for retraining, infrastructural development and so on. So political will is vital. All studies show that political will is the single most constraining factor when it comes to these kinds of processes. So to conclude, Chair, key ingredient has to be government action, preferably as a legal requirement for investment planning and worker participation. This process cannot be left to market forces. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. Yes, very interesting your contribution. Unser letzter
last speaker for this round is Konrad Liszczewski. He's from Poland and from Razem.
Ein bisschen Zeit, Alles klar. Witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie w imieniu swoim, ale też Leszka Garnika, tutaj też z Komisji Przemysłowo-Energetycznej Rady Krajowej Razem. Bardzo dziękujemy za zaproszenie zarówno frakcji, ale też Fundacji Róży Luksemburg. Proszę Państwa, na samym początku naszego dzisiejszego spotkania Also doch, okay, alles klar. Schön. Ich hätte auch gedacht, dass das...
Ich dachte, das ging schneller.
Okay, alles klar, kein Problem.
Kein Problem.
Wie zeigen Sie die Zeit an? Irgendwie
Ich mache.
Genau,
so weiter.
nach 5 Minuten oder so?
Kneife.
Nach 5 Minuten? Nach 4?
Nach 5 Minuten.
Okay, alles
Und
klar.
dann kneife ich nochmal. Gut. Kein Problem.
Da übernehme ich das Streicheln.
Gut, du übernimmst das Streicheln.
Ja, ob das übersetzt wird, weiß ich nicht.
Can we start? Ja. So, jetzt können wir starten.
Jeszcze raz bardzo...
Once again, let me welcome all of you and thank you for invitation. Thank you for inviting me and Leszek, who is the representative of the Innovation Committee in our party. We also would like to thank the Rosa Luxemburg organization. Now, you may probably remember a meeting that we held probably a year ago, and since then we have managed to create a good structure of the left-wing alliance in Poland. Currently the left-wing parties have no representation in the parliament in Poland. Jarosław Kaczyński and his party won by landslide, and we basically went back to medieval times. The most flagrant example of backwardness is the lack of provisions, legal provisions that are to regulate, for example, boilers that can be used by households. This may be an individual example, but this clearly shows how bad our politicians are and how mad they are. Basically, if we were to introduce good legal provisions, everybody would win. It would be good news for boiler producers. You have to remember that we have 4 million boilers in Poland. So if we were to modernize boilers, we would be able to provide enough work for boilers producers for the coming 20 years. Moreover, if we were to modernize the whole network to go with the building upgrade, this means that we would have thousands of new jobs, and at the same time people would not have to pay more for their energy bills. So living conditions would improve, energy costs would be cut, boiler producers would be happy. But contrary to what is reasonable, our government decided to introduce absolutely no legal provisions. And this backwardness can be noticed in many other areas. Quite recently, our Minister for Energy decided that they would introduce a major investment package in 4 biggest state-owned energy companies to the tune of 170 billion zlotys. This is tantamount to 40 million euros. And all of this money is to be spent on coal. This is simply outrageous. This goes against the grain of what is now necessary. Poland is in quite a good situation in terms of energy situation. Why? Our lignite deposits will run out in around 15 to 20 years. Most of the capacities and most of our power plants are obsolete. So if we were to use upgrading measures, we would prolong their life by about 10 to 15 years. This will give us enough time to transform in a steady and reasonable manner. And it will be very cost effective. It will not be painful, neither for employees and employers. So we demand that we give up on coal within the next 10 to 20 years. We've got technological know-how and we've got proper resource backup. But if we were to invest in obsolete power units and if we were to subsidize coal heavily, we will end up with power plants that will cost us more, will simply lose us money, and will translate into CO2 emissions. So what can be done in order to help the energy sector? The key issue in this area is to see more participation, not only in information exchange, decision making, but also in capital investments. People who are to lose their jobs because of energy transformation have to participate in renewables investments. We have to move away from seeing two groups fighting with one another. So, in our opinion, for us, renewables should be based on biomass, on thermal sources. We also should focus on wind and solar energy. We've got proper regions in Poland where we can create and establish new infrastructure elements. New infrastructure will mean new jobs. These jobs cannot be exported to Bangladesh or India. So, in order to see a great change, we have to install new infrastructure and modern power plants. Now, let me refer to what has been said so far. I am glad to have heard that you mentioned that free market economy will not translate into structured transformation. It will be difficult to talk about just transformation. Therefore, wherever we see that there is a need for a structure change, we have to see involvement of various political parties, but also stakeholders. Wherever we see the possibility to help and to subsidize, we should do it. I should like to thank for what has been said by Mr. Marconi, but I would like to focus on one area, namely special economic zone. You showed how fast we can change and work to the benefit of the people. And I believe that by creating such good special economic zones that are good examples, we can compete. We shouldn't introduce tax measures that will cut down private investment, and we should work to the benefit of all the nations. Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank, Konrad.
Thank you very much, Konrad. That was a very lively contribution. That's also very important. It's important for us to bring pressure to bear jointly. So thank you very much. We've got about half an hour, no more, for the debate. No idea how it's going to play out, but I'm very curious to hear your questions. Please be brief, so that we've got time to hear the replies. Who'd like to set the ball rolling?
Yeah, I will try to ask the issue around energy poverty, because if the title of the conference is just transition, to make this really credible, I think one of the issues to be tackled is the energy poverty. If we take the last report from the housing observatory in France, the energy poverty has gone from 10 million to 12 million people. It means that with technology, with increase in energy efficiency target, I don't think that we will, like you have said, tackle this problem, because, like you know, the first target reached with the directive was not the energy poverty. It was the low-hanging fruit, and the low-hanging fruit is not the energy poverty. And to tackle the energy poverty, we have to find new solutions, because without the right business model to finance the energy renovation, retrofit, we will never reach the target, even with 30% energy efficiency by 2050. And for the moment, I don't know a single member state where this problem has been has found a solution.
Ja, hallo, ich bin Moment. Ich bin Leila Sharabi von der Rosa Luxemburg.
Anna Sharadi, I'm from the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation in Berlin. As a member of the left wing and a trade union activist, I think that all of this is extremely interesting. Just one question. I've been intensely involved with international climate policy. I've just come back from 2 weeks in Marrakesh, and one of the main demands is for economic reparations from the north to the south by 2020, I get the feeling that we're talking about something that's going to happen in the future, but we really have to talk about what's happening now. The climate is already changing. It's already threatening lots of countries immediately, more and more. So that's one question. Another question. Fairness, just transition, fine. Perhaps we should try to extend the scope of that globally. What about global justice? Do you think that there might be new PR strategies to be used by left-wing politicians in order to convince people that our way of life, the way it is right now, cannot continue as it is, and that we are also responsible for other people being able to live on this planet in future? I know it's difficult because when people are really focusing on their election results here in Europe, but I think that perhaps we should think a little bit beyond just the boundaries of Europe. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think it's very important to have this debate today. I'd just like to offer two remarks. The first one is I'd like to warn against the practice of isolating climate change from the rest of the ecological crisis. According to the Stockholm Resilience Center, there are 9 planetary boundaries, like ocean acidification, deforestation, ozone layer, soil depletion, etc. And climate is just one of them. Biodiversity could be, according to some scientists, a more urgent problem even than climate. So all the pillars of the environment, they interact. And by isolating climate change from the whole, we risk to come up with false solutions. I think about electrical cars, for instance. So therefore, I think we need to propose systemic solutions that take into account all of the 9 planetary boundaries. And that is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity in our way to define the new narrative that we need for a sustainable world. And this brings me to my second remark. A new narrative to win the workers for a transition, but not just an energy transition, but a global ecological transition. It must be built on a scientifically solid baseline of the Earth's resources and how much of the resources can be used within a one planet footprint. Therefore, I salute the proposition of Marc Delpour this morning and his research, global European or even international research project. Because before we come up with solutions, we must first know how much CO2 can be used, how much wood can be used in the air, how much fish can be drowned from the oceans. Because you don't engage in a trip before knowing what's in your backpack. We spoke about Sweden this morning. They have super isolated houses there, which is great, but they're still in the top 10 of countries with the heaviest ecological footprint. So if you don't have a baseline, if you don't have a global idea of what you have and how you have to share what you have, you're going nowhere and you're bound to fail. That was my 2 remarks. Thanks.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you for that contribution. That needs to be borne in mind during the replies. Yes. Next person.
My colleague here from Die Linke. We are faced with a crisis we didn't have before, and as somebody right here mentioned, the only speed of change that happened was during Second World War. But if we think about the mobilization and the discourse there, it wasn't happy. It was discourse showing reality, how things in front of us have to face with different challenges that will be both happy and unhappy. I think that the problem sometimes we have that we try to produce everything as a positive alternative. While for some, the alternatives won't be positive. In some cases, we'll try to do the best, we'll succeed. In other cases, we won't. And I'm in some of the discussions, I'm lacking this communication honesty in saying the transition will be just in some cases. The transition will try to have just in those regions that want to go with us, but some of the regions simply won't, and they will be opposing as much as they can. We know it around the world. It's simply this how the world works, and the cost of this will also be there. Like the people who are prepared for the transition will be much better off than those that won't be prepared. But we can't promise that we deliver everybody happy. And I think there needs to be a little bit of thinking of how to present the road as possibly happy, possibly not so happy as an effort. Like we know all from climate science, but we can't even say if we can make it still. Like we know that we can try the best of our efforts and we'll do everything, and hopefully if we do it right, the nature and won't back on us and we are already not from the tipping point. So the honesty we can offer is if we sit down, we are doomed, right? But if we keep on working, maybe we have a chance. And it's not a very nice discourse. It's not something that people like to tell each other, but it's not honest discourse. And that I would just mention it because I'm seeing how in a lot of countries that are further away from the developed world, we're losing people on the way because we want to have the discussion happy for everybody, and it's impossible. Because a discussion happy for, let's say, German workers won't necessarily be happy for the people on the Fiji, right? The time that will be needed for concentrating this transition will be backing somebody else. But it doesn't only happen between Fiji and Western Europe. It's starting to be Central Eastern Europe too. So I think this needs to be thought well enough and maybe packaged for slightly different means of communication to slightly different audiences, because there is no one size package all in the just transition discussion, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Thank you. We hear a lot of terminologies like energy pollution, human and animal health. We eat most of them. We hear energy poverty, energy efficiency, and the problem is how can we work together with all this, because all these terminologies are not working in hand. So my question is, which is the number one solution? Is it energy housing, or is it creating isolation, creating new working places?
Okay. Yes, Rolf de Pong. This is me. Yeah. Okay. This, I think there's an elephant in the room. It was in one of the contributions as if it would be a solution to go into the woods and to use wood more in the energy sector. This will only lead to a continuation of the old utilities. Then they can have a longer life. In reality, the emissions from big trees which are chopped into the nice small stuff, the pellets, is bigger than from both oil and coal emissions. So when we talk about substituting coal, don't think that a transition to wood pellets would solve anything. It is just the contrary. We have the problem in Denmark that this has been done, and it is very detrimental, I think, for the image of the Danish energy policy.
Ganz kurz bloß, ich denke auch, dass wir viele Themen einfach...
Well, very briefly, I think we're mixing too many subjects together. I mean, one big topic was coal. Obviously, the other things that have been mentioned have a role to play, but I think we'd need a several-day long conference to get through all of that. We're talking about creating a model region to ensure this transition, which all regions are facing, and how to all those regions that are involved in coal mining, they're all facing this transition. The research project was mentioned, is also part of that, but we need to test the ground somehow and see how we can make use of these experiences from different parts of Europe and allow them to flow in to the debate and then be able to project them to other regions of Europe. So it's an idea that certainly shouldn't fall by the wayside.
Question, I think it could be to anyone on the panel. Can you hear me now that Maxime has turned my microphone on? I have missed a word so far in our discussion, and that word, which is actually two words, is the energy commons. We are going to switch from forms of energy that are owned by capital, that are centrally managed, to sources of energy that are around us. The sun, water, the wind. These are commons. They should not and cannot be alienated in order to produce for profit. So we need to very much evolve a model of what is our view of producing for use in terms of the energy we're going to have. And that's what I would like you to react on, if it's possible.
Jetzt würde ich sagen, noch ein...
Okay, let's take one more question, if there is one. Otherwise, we can leave it at that. Robert, you're the last one, of course, for this discussion. Go ahead, please. Yes, I wanted to respond to the person next to me about the whole hierarchy between efficiency, renewables, etc. How can we make structural change which will also create jobs? And obviously, there was lots of criticism of the German government about its climate policy recently. Some of that policy was very good because it established a hierarchy. It said efficiency first. And then if you can't avoid something, then you should use renewables, they said. That was the second level. And biomass was really given a secondary role. So they really weren't going to rely a lot on biomass. Basically, they were going to focus on efficiency and then to replace everything else possible with renewables. Including cross-border regions. And of course, that means efficiency first for buildings, which means revamping old buildings, retrofitting old buildings, making them energy efficient, rather than building new buildings and making them CO2-free, for example. That also means, obviously, creating lots of new jobs for craftsmen. And at the same time, all of these means that there's a huge social problem coming our way because it's going to be a lot more expensive to make existing buildings energy efficient than it is going to be to build new buildings. That's a huge challenge, a big problem. It's often a lot more it's one of the most expensive things, aspects of the phasing out of carbon energy. And that's something which could threaten the entire future of our structural change. Obviously, we do want to make existing buildings energy efficient, so we have to strike the right building so that we can be successful. The German government was quite successful in saying that both those costs should be met by the state. If it is more difficult, if it's more expensive to make a building energy efficient than to make a new building, then they said that the German government would have to cover the cost just for that difference. That unfortunately fell by the wayside in the second version of the bill, so it didn't end up getting passed at the end of the day. Well, it was a good try in any case. Okay, thanks very much for that statement. Very interesting. Okay, we're basically through with the time for questions. I would like to ask all of the speakers to respond to the questions that were put to them, but not more than 1 minute, please. If you think that's something that hasn't been touched on by other people, just pick out one thing and just 1 minute, please, for each one of you. Jeremy, first.
Yep, thank you. I'd like to focus on energy efficiency. I very much agree with the fact that it should be priority number one. And you first insulate properly your building stock, you reduce your energy consumption, and what remains shall be covered by renewables and not the other way around. I also agree very much with the fact that indeed some supports for energy efficiency have not been properly, some instruments have not been properly tailored, that they were mostly addressing, let's say, the middle class or middle upper class, but not providing a proper solution to energy poverty, and this should be changed. Especially, I think increasing the level of ambition can help, not in itself, but because it creates like energy savings obligations, where utilities have, and it should be reinforced, of course, have to allow more savings, targeting especially vulnerable consumers. And lastly, I think it's important not only in terms of energy poverty, but in terms of like human dignity. Because families need to live in not only in properly insulated buildings for the sake of lowering energy bills, but also for the health of the kids, for the health of the family, and for the well-being of the whole household. So it's not only a purely energy perspective.
Thank you. A lot of really interesting points. In Scotland we call it fuel poverty, but energy poverty as well. The Scottish Government, which Scottish Labour supports, has a vision for having one of our national infrastructure projects as energy efficiency. So the last one was the new Forth Road Bridge. So this is more dispersed but much more valuable. And so that will bring a lot of money in, and I think we'll see whether that's a good solution or not. In terms of global issues, I think that Marrakesh has shown how much clout regions have and how important that is, and Scotland has a climate justice fund which is very targeted, and that supports sub-Saharan Africa for developing ways of working to tackle climate. The discussion paper that we have in Scottish Labour, which I'm helping to lead on in my role, does address a whole range of environmental challenges, not only climate change, and they are indeed very interlocked, and structural changes in agriculture, fisheries, and transport and housing are all absolutely essential. And I think the point I would make to those who think that, which I can understand that argument, that we need to start possibly with coal or with one particular aspect to make models, is that the effects on workers are just as strong in fisheries and marine issues, and those are climate change and biodiversity reasons why we need to shift and have compensation. So there must be compensation for workers where they have to move on, and training, and that is right across a whole range of sectors.
Thank you. I also think that it would be a little dangerous to focus on just one issue in fighting climate change. And I think climate change is broader, just like was pointed out over there. Therefore, I think that we have to think in the perspective of systemic change. We don't know if it's going to happen, but I think we do have to think in that perspective as well. And I think it would be very dangerous just to isolate it. Then I think climate change is global. What we are doing here is that we come from European countries. So we are discussing what can we do. What can we do that would affect our countries, our citizens? You know, that is what we are discussing here, but that has an effect on the global situation. We shouldn't forget that this has a huge effect, because we are one of the most polluting regions in the world. So this is extremely important that we have that in mind. And then I think that with regard to how we can. I said electricity-driven transition. But we would warn against, and I would just introduce it, we would warn against biomass, especially if it's imported, because this affects in a very bad way developing countries, because most of that land is used also for food. And we really have to think about that. Maybe we can do some biomass which doesn't harm in our own areas. We can make a research into it, whether it can be done. But really, don't advise importing biomass, because it affects developing countries. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Interesting discussion. I was taken by the comment about commons, that they shouldn't be used for profit, and that would be nice. I mean, already in Britain, I mean, I expect elsewhere as well, just to pay for water to come out of the tap, is a huge amount of money going into private profit, so that would be nice. But I think they're only going to be commons if we have major political change. Also, the idea of a new narrative to win workers to transition, that had resonance for me too. But I think certainly in Britain, or not necessarily in Scotland, which is more progressive, but certainly in England, there's going to be a huge difficulty with that, because the narrative is shifting away from those kinds of progressive issues towards the kind of Brexit disaster that we find ourselves in, and let's not mess about. The majority of the left and the labour movement and the trade unions were absolutely opposed to Brexit, but we are stuck, it seems, with Brexit, which was driven by a far-right agenda where all kinds of people who should know better fell for the lies that immigration is responsible for the problems that we face. Not true, obviously. Immigration is beneficial for our society and our economy. It's austerity policies that cause the problem. So shifting the narrative on that and getting back to truth on that would be a very, very positive thing. So I think we are perhaps in a more difficult situation than you are elsewhere within the European Union. So in terms of my priority, I would have to opt for political change.
Thank you very much, Kate. And Konrad? Please.
Warten?
So.
Oder vielleicht erst...
No. Yes, possible. You can.
Okay.
Absolutely. Uwe summarized the situation so well in terms of modernizing thermal insulation. Therefore, we should see a public investment program that will end all the problems pertaining to funding. We'll enjoy funding, public funding and the EU funding, and will not have to cut costs in order to find sufficient money. Moreover, we will focus on good quality jobs. In terms of importing biomass, I do agree, but biomass has got a good potential if we're to use, for example, agricultural produce that is still not used. Now, what should we use to what are we to use in order to put it in the thermal insulation system? In terms of heating, we should consider biomethane that could be used. We could use biogas. We could use current transmission networks. This would be a good advantage. But this is another challenge that we have to deal with once we deal with the issue of transforming our electricity grid. In terms of international cooperation, we should create good win-win scenarios. If, for example, Africa can manage better to generate solar energy, we should cooperate with this region. We should cooperate with entities coming from this region. So it's a win-win situation for everyone. Thank you.
Konrad? Thank you, Konrad. Right. As the last speaker, I'll just say that in 1716, the word sustainability was mentioned for the first time, which led to a change in energy. There was no longer any wood or timber available, so they had to be sustainable, and that led to an industrial revolution and a capitalist society. I think we've reached the time where we're talking about an energy revolution and maybe a sustainable society. We need to have that discussion. It's a bit more than what Mr. Kalovitz wanted. He just he thought merely of the economy, but we need to think about all of this. We know that economy, ecology and social aspects go together. We've known that since the 1970s. So I think there should be a second conference after this one dealing with sustainability goals from the point of view of the left. Thank you very much, and thank you to all the speakers on the panel. Thank you very much for being concise and clear, and for being frank. Thank you also for the very open and frank questions that I think needed to be tabled if we are to make progress jointly. Thank you very much to all of those who've contributed to the discussion. We now have 15 minutes for a coffee break, which means we will meet again at 4:25. You might be lucky and find a couple of baguette sandwiches and bananas that we've been able to get hold of in the meantime. I know there were some people that didn't manage to get any lunch, so you might get a second chance now. Some sandwiches and bananas might be left.